Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. This is your host for today, Kate Carter.
And I'm Kylie Colwell.
And it's just us once again, but I will say we are giving little Holly a break right now. Okay. She just got back from her honeymoon. Her house may or may not be flooding. We're not really sure. So it's just the two of us this morning. Everybody pray for Holly. So this episode is going to be coming out after Thanksgiving. Whenever holidays come around, some of us like to do special holiday episodes that have to do with that holiday, blah, 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 and people dying. And that would be me. So I thought, what the hell? Why not do a Thanksgiving case? Because Thanksgiving is supposed to be like this very comfortable day, predictable. We all eat, we all get really drunk, maybe in some situations.
Every situation.
Yeah. And pretend that everything's all right in our lives. But in Little Falls, Minnesota, there was a house on Elm Street, which I love the name, where Thanksgiving 2012 did not smell like turkey cooking in the oven. It smelled like gunpowder and basement concrete. And that's because on Thanksgiving Day in 2012, two teenagers walked into the wrong house, and a man was waiting in the dark, deciding that this holiday was finally his chance to do something he'd been rehearsing for months. This is the story of Byron David Smith, the man who recorded a double murder like it was a home movie, and then tried to convince the world that it was self defense. Okay, so it's 2012. Like I said, we're in Little Falls, Minnesota. It's a really small town, but we're already in the 2000s. It's not like a hella old case. People do lock their doors in this town, but not really because of safety, just more so out of habit because you should. Everyone knew each other. People even knew the town's police officers by their first names. So, like, quiet but safe town. Insert Brian David Smith. So, he is a 64-year-old man. He lived alone in a pretty normal, modest house on a street called Elm Street. And now Byron was born on November 17th in 1948 in Minnesota. He did end up spending most of his life living in Little Falls, the town, or at least close to it. So he is a through and through Minnesotian. I think that's what they're called. Now, Byron's childhood and young adulthood wasn't really like traumatic, pretty quiet, unremarkable. He was known to be a kid who just didn't want to be around or cause any trouble. He didn't really fit into large social groups, so he just kind of kept to himself. He was really smart, but he just did his own thing growing up. One of the biggest formative periods of Brian's life, I would say, is when he decided to join the Air Force after high school. He ended up working in a security and technical role, and that also included going and being deployed multiple times. He was reported as honorable and reliable, according to his peers and fellow soldiers, but he was constantly put in these environments where insecurity, especially if you're deployed, like self protection and vigilance were like pretty much everyday requirements. Like you had to be there 24/7. So Byron became super hyper aware of his surroundings at all times, had like this defensive behavior, even though he's really quiet, and just seemed to not really trust a lot of people. He just kept to himself. After Byron left the military, he stayed in this like preparedness mode pretty much for the rest of his life. By the time Byron was in his 50s and 60s, he had essentially withdrawn from any type of social life. He had a few friends, but they were pretty much just neighbors. He was never married, never had kids, and spent most of his days at home working on different projects. And Byron's neighbors saw him as a quiet man who was maybe a little odd, but not dangerous whatsoever. He was just a loner. Leading up to Thanksgiving Day in 2012. In the year 2012 itself, Byron had started to become obsessed with the idea that his house was being targeted. I honestly understand why, because for a full year now, several home burglaries had happened. He had had at least three or four burglaries to his own house.
Oh, I would be moving.
Right. Honestly, after one, I feel like that might do it. It's your comfort space.
Oh yeah, I'd never feel safe in my home again.
No. So when I'm like searching the story and everything says like, oh, he was obsessed with like this idea that he was being targeted, I was like, well, he kind of was. He kind of was. As someone who like he lives alone, he's older, he is a quiet dude to begin with. He definitely felt violated. and he felt unsafe in the one place he was pretty much able to control his surroundings. So Byron at this point became obsessed and determined to stop the burglaries from happening again, which we would move. Byron won't move, but we'll do extra security protocols. So, like, to each their own. But the way he did it is not the way it should be done. He upgraded his security system. I get that. He put cameras around the house. He did sensors. He did audio recording devices. So, not like just like the casual doorbell, like ring camera. He went full out security. The neighbors that Byron did have and speak to, he began telling them that if someone was going to break into his house again, he would be ready. While all of this is going on across town, two young cousins were stirring up some trouble. These two were 18-year-old Haile Kifer and 17-year-old Nicholas Brady. Now, these two cousins weren't career criminals or anything like that. Nicholas did find himself to be in trouble this past year a little bit more than normal. He had been involved in some small burglaries in town, and he had been having a rough year with his family. His family was like not stable. Nicholas was falling behind in school, and he, as we hear in most stories, had been hanging out with some older teenagers who weren't the best influences. So some of the adults in town thought Nick was fixable, but others were like, oh no, he's heading down a dangerous road for sure. As for his cousin Haile, she was not into the criminal scene herself. She did have a reputation of being like this strong willed girl, maybe a little too impulsive on the moment and liked confrontation, but that's just kind of who she was. Unfortunately, she was kind of trying to help her cousin Nicholas this past year with everything he was going through. And so she had been hanging out with him a lot and apparently had been there for all the burglaries he had committed. So she's kind of a part of it.
That does make you an accomplice.
It does. It does. Even though I think she might have been sitting in the car for some of them still. So Haile and Nick on Thanksgiving decided that they were already going to do another break in and they were targeting Byron's house. They assumed Byron would not be there because on Thanksgiving, unless you pick the wrong house, most people are gone because they're visiting family or friends or whatnot. On early November 22nd, 2012, Byron drove his car down Elm Street in his neighborhood and parked it in front of a neighbor's home. Investigators would later say that Byron did this on purpose to make his house appear empty. But Byron would always stick to the story that he was planning on visiting that neighbor that day. But that's when he saw Haile and Nick drive down his street, and he kind of recognized the car before and believed that they were maybe the people responsible for his personal break ins. I don't think I really go for the story that Byron was going to visit that neighbor later for Thanksgiving because why park your car, walk home, and then go back to that house at some point for Thanksgiving?
Yeah, that doesn't add up.
Not at all. So when Byron saw the two driving down the street, he was like, they're headed for my house. I know it. Byron ran back to his own house. He turned on a recording device that he owned. He removed the light bulbs from the house, and in particular, the ceiling lights that led to his basement. And then Byron put himself in a chair in the basement with the door open, and the chair was in a corner, kind of hidden from the stairs. And he just sat there. And as Haile and Nick approached Byron's house, they assumed he wasn't home. His car wasn't there. So at approximately 12:30 p.m., Nicholas broke the upstairs window first, and then he unlocked the front door to let Haile in, but she stayed in the car and waited first. Now, before I go any further, I do want to say the rest of the story, we know all of these details because Byron was recording on an audio device the entire time. In the recordings, around 12:30, you hear the glass break upstairs, the window. You hear the front door creak open, and then there's a pause of about 10 minutes. And in that pause, Byron is mumbling to himself in the basement. You can hear him heavy breathing. And then you hear footsteps that definitely are starting to come down the basement stairs. The first person to reach the bottom of the basement stairs was Nick. As he steps off the staircase into the basement, there's a moment of silence on the audio recording where Nick was likely trying to adjust his eyes to the dark because, if you remember, none of the lights would work in the house. Byron had taken them out of the staircase as well. So Nick probably couldn't see shit. It was probably very dark down there. And I assume the windows might have been covered up at this point, too. As this is going on, Byron doesn't make a sound. He's sitting in his chair in the corner. He doesn't yell. He doesn't identify himself in the basement corner. He doesn't try to scare Nick off. He just waits until Nicholas's head appears below the staircase line and in sight. And then a gunshot rings through the basement on the audio recording. Byron had fired his .22 rifle and it hit Nicholas in the chest, and he immediately falls to the ground. That's when Byron gets out of his seat and approaches Nick. Instead of yelling at him, warning him, or calling 911, Byron begins walking towards Nicholas and he fires again, this time hitting him in the torso. As Nick lays on the ground, he's moaning, or you can hear him moaning. He's bleeding out, but he's still alive. Byron then stands over him, puts his .22 under Nicholas's chin, and pulls the trigger. It's an instant kill shot. After the shots are heard on the recording, you can hear Byron say, quote, "You're dead. I gave you a chance," which is not true.
Zero, he baited him into the house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Seeing that Nicholas is now dead, Byron wrapped up his body in a tarp and dragged him into another room in the basement. It's like a workroom. It can't be seen from the staircase. Now, instead of going upstairs or checking the house for anyone else or calling 911, Byron reloads his gun and sits back down into the chair in the basement that he was originally waiting in, almost as if he knew Haile was going to come in the house at some point. I find that very odd that he waited because he doesn't know that Haile's in the house. He doesn't know that Haile's left because she's still in the car at this point. When Nick had entered the house through the upstairs window that he had broken, he went around to the front door and unlocked it, but Haile stayed waiting for Nicholas to come back out. But after about 10 to 12 minutes after Nicholas was killed, Haile decides to get out of the car and enter Byron's house and can be heard quietly, very softly on the audio recordings, calling out for her cousin. Later on in the court records, she could be heard on the recording devices moving around the house because you can tell by the sound of her voice, like whispering Nick or yelling Nick, just kind of trying. You can figure out basically that she was walking around all the rooms trying to find her cousin. And at some point, she realizes that he's not around, but she did find the open door to the staircase that led to the basement and decided to enter. But this time, Byron didn't wait until his target was all the way down the stairs and into the basement. This time, Haile made it about halfway down the staircase before Byron shot her point blank from his chair in the corner. Haile is hit and falls down the remainder of the stairs and onto the basement's concrete floor. At this point, Haile is alive. You can hear her crying and moving around on the ground. And you can also hear Byron say, quote, "Oh, sorry about that," on his recording. And then he shoots her again, hitting her in the stomach. As this is happening, just like he did with Nick, Byron is approaching Haile. You can hear Haile screaming something along the lines of, "I'm sorry," which Byron then responds by yelling, "You're dying, bitch." After he says that, Byron shoots Haile for a third time, this time in the head by her left eye. But somehow, after being shot 3 times now, Haile isn't dead at this point, but she's not able to move and is very obviously bleeding out and dying in a horrific manner. Byron then drags Haile into the other room in the basement where Nick's lifeless body is laying, and he tosses Haile on top of him. Byron then says, quote, "Sorry about that. I just need to finish you off," as he places the gun under her chin and pulls the trigger, just like he did with Nicholas. And then, just to confirm she's actually dead, he shoots her for a 5th time directly into the head.
He is like so nonchalant about this.
Very
Creepy.
Both 18-year-old Haile Kifer and 17-year-old Nicholas Brady are dead, very, very dead. Later on, an autopsy reported that Nicholas had been shot 3 times, Haile had been shot 6 times, and some of the shootings had been done post-mortem. After doing what he did, Byron cleaned up the basement and headed upstairs. He left the teenagers' bodies downstairs overnight. Byron then cooks and eats a Thanksgiving dinner to himself, reads a book, and goes to bed. The next morning, on Friday, November 23rd, Byron decides to call the sheriff's office. And why did Byron wait a day to call the police? Well, his explanation was, quote, "I didn't want to bother you guys on Thanksgiving."
That's nice of him.
So nice. He was very thoughtful. It wasn't even the morning. It was like 3 p.m. when Byron decided to call the police. So a good over 24 hours since the kids had entered his house, you know? On the 911 call, Byron stated that two intruders broke in and he shot them point blank. But when the police first arrived on the scene, they obviously thought, like, oh, this is a cut and dry, like, self defense case. But then Byron starts to talk and he tells the officer things like he had neutralized the targets and that he had, quote, they had chosen to break into the wrong guy's house. And that's when the police entered Byron's basement. He led them to where the bodies are in the workroom. When you drag a body from the crime scene and then you place two bodies on top of each other, it's definitely staged like that. If you move anything, then it's considered staged. But like you can tell Byron's just very nonchalant about like, oh, and then I put their bodies over here and laid them on top of each other.
It's been over 24 hours at this point. Like they're obviously not freshly deceased. It didn't just
No.
happen.
Yeah. Inside the basement's tucked away workroom, there was blood pooled beneath both Haile and Nicholas's bodies, shell casings on the floor, Byron's guns were neatly placed aside, and weird enough, Byron's audio recording was still going. He just left it on for funsies. What detectives immediately noticed was that there was no signs of panic from Byron. There had been no calls for emergency help during the break in or after. There had been an execution style wound on both bodies, multiple shots. The scene had this weird setup going on, and that Byron was emotionless and calm the entire time. Like there was no fear from Byron. He was in control of all of it. So once Byron was taken in for questioning, he described how he set up the trap for the two potential burglars. He told the investigators that Haile and Nick weren't people, they were venom. And when he was asked why he didn't call for help and why he shot both kids while they were already on the ground, Byron stated that he didn't want them to suffer. And that's when Byron dropped the line about his finishing shots. He told the police that he did a, quote, good, clean finishing shot on both bodies. He wanted to end their sufferings. And while the investigators are listening to Byron and are trying to figure out how, like, this is a whole self defense case. Obviously, they struggled with that because in a lawful self defense version of this case, Byron could have been like, oh, I was scared. I fired because I had to. I called the police immediately. But literally, none of that happened at all. This pretty much sounded like someone who had been waiting for a long time and kind of fantasizing about what he was going to do if like burglars came in. So at some point, the investigators tell Byron that they found his audio recordings. And that's when his demeanor kind of changes for the first time. I don't know if he thought they weren't going to find them. I'm confused about why they're there, anyways. But his jaw visibly tightened and he began to breathe a little bit heavy. He asked what the investigators heard out of the audio recordings, and they list out several of his self recorded phrases because the entire time that this incident's going on, Byron's talking to himself and he's saying like weird shit. You know, it's almost like he's practicing or rehearsing lines. Once the investigators said, like, oh no, we listened to all of the recordings, Byron says, oh, well, sometimes I talk to myself, which is pretty much when the officers knew like this wasn't a castle doctrine case, it was more of an execution case. For those who don't know, because you know, you may not, what the castle doctrine case, like a case is. Castle doctrine is legal, is it's a principle pretty much. Let's say your house is a castle. That's the best way to put it. And it allows a person to use reasonable and in some states like Florida, deadly force to defend their house, aka their castle, against any type of intruder. This specific doctrine removes the duty to retreat in the face of an unlawful or violent entry into your home. It's pretty much based on the idea that you should be able to defend your physical home and or family without having to flee, especially if you're confronted with some type of like serious threat, which could be, you know, violent crime, violent person, weapons, stuff like that. In Florida, they have the stand your ground law. I think is a very tricky law. I understand it to a point. I also don't understand it to a point. I think it can be overused and there needs to be better guidelines on it for sure.
That's the problem with it is it's like, okay, we're basing it off of the person, how they felt if
Right.
they were under threat. But that's not cut and dry.
Now, in Byron's case, legal analysts would later on say that the initial shootings of both Nicholas and Haile could have been justified under the Minnesota's castle doctrine laws, but because Byron shot them multiple times afterwards and didn't have weapons on them, once justified threat had been removed from this case. Once they had been shot and wounded the first time, the threat of them being able to do anything to Byron was pretty much over. So his self-declaimed case would have really only made sense if he had stopped and called the police there. But of course, we know that's not what happened. And he waited, I think, like 26, 27 hours to call the police. Because Byron's audio recordings lasted hours, a whole day, this is just a little quote from some of what the investigators heard from some of the audio recordings. Now, remember, Byron says he's just talking to himself the whole time because there's nobody else in the house. This doesn't all mean it's in a sentence either. It could have been over a period of time, but this is just an example. So, quote, I am not a bleeding heart liberal. I'm cleaning up a mess. This isn't like food or vomit. It's not even like diarrhea. I'm stuck with this situation. I'm doing my civic duty. If law enforcement can't handle it, I have to do it. I had to do it. The system couldn't handle them, and it fell into my lap. She shouldn't have come. She threw her problem in my face, and I cleaned it up. End quote. So, with all of the recorded audio statements, the evidence indicating he had been planning these shootings, along with the excessive number of shots he had fired, Byron was eventually charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, and his bail was set at $50K, which he posted. Now, of course, in such a small town like Little Falls, homicides don't really happen that often, let alone in these type of circumstances or on a holiday. So when word spreads that a 64-year-old quiet, retired veteran had killed 2 teen burglars, the town pretty much erupted with like conflicting opinions. One side of the town said Byron had every right to defend himself because these kids were criminals. They had broken into his house before. Byron didn't ask to get robbed. Byron's a hero, which is really sad. Plus, this side argued that Nick and Haile had broken into other people's homes before, and town residents were tired of these crimes, so Byron had a right to protect his home. But the other half of the town that disagreed, they obviously saw something much darker. They said that Byron had waited for these kids to execute them. He didn't call for help because he knew he didn't need it. And that Byron had sat in his basement chair like he was hunting them. Kylie said he was baiting them to go downstairs. Obviously, the parents of both Haile and Nick are devastated. They definitely insisted that these murders were cold, calculated, evil, and honestly, most of the evidence supports their view. Because while the castle doctrine does exist, premeditation pretty much would outweigh everything. I think it's a pretty clear-cut premeditation case. But even though Byron was initially charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, on April 25th, 2013, a year later, or half a year later, a grand jury indicted him on 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder in the deaths of both Haile Kifer and Nicholas Brady. The grand jury found probable cause that Byron had considered, planned, and prepared for the act before he committed it. In a pretrial defense motion, Byron's defense team tried to dismiss the indictment on a few grounds like evidence issues, just kind of like things that they were throwing out in general, but the district court denied those motions. On April 21st, 2014, Byron Smith's jury trial began in Morrison County, Minnesota. And by this time, prosecutors had a large mountain of evidence against Byron, including the following: his audio recordings, ballistic reports, Byron's pre-written notes, different security logs from the house, Byron's neighbors' testimonies, the positioning of both Haile and Nicholas's bodies, Byron's own statements to the investigators, the fact that he moved his car prior to the break-in to appear that he was not home, and also the fact that he waited over 24 hours to call the police. The prosecution was trying to paint a picture of a man who felt violated by past burglaries, which I get, but he became obsessed and started fantasizing about killing them. And that Byron pretty much had waited for this opportunity and then executed the teenagers without any hesitation. After the prosecution's opening statements, the defense argued that Byron had feared for his life, he was a repeated victim of break-ins, and that Byron also had suffered PTSD from his military work overseas. But honestly, the centerpiece pretty much for the entire trial was the fact that Byron had recorded everything, and the preparation that Byron did, like removing the light bulbs to the basement. Like that's premeditation.
I am confused about the audio recordings. Did he want to record this whole interaction, or he just like forgot to turn them off from his home security
No,
system?
because he ran back from the neighbor's house and turned them on. I think he was thinking it was going to help his case. Like if he had recorded the kids breaking into his house and then he forgot to stop the recordings after he had killed them, not that much but like it also proved that he just went on and lived his normal life for 24 hours. I think he truly thought this was going to be a case where he would get off because they were break-ins and intruders and stuff like that. Like he could claim self-defense and then he would have those audio recordings to listen to.
Maybe I listened to too much true crime, but I'm like, I think he wanted to listen to those and get off on that after the fact.
That's yes, that's what I yeah. There's a good chance. So first in the courtroom, everyone got to listen to Byron's home audio recordings. They heard the glass breaking on the first floor. They heard Nicholas's footsteps. Then the first gunshot went off. You could hear Nicholas breathing and groaning as he tried to breathe. And then Byron muttered his lines, one of his many lines, "You're dead," followed by more shots, then silence. Then Haile could be heard screaming, more shots, crying, then, quote, the finishing shot. Dragging could be heard on the audio, Byron talking to himself some more. And while all of this is being played for the court, some jurors could be seen visibly crying, and one juror even threw up.
No, if I was his defense attorney, I'd be like, okay, time to
Yep.
talk about a plea.
Yeah, we're fucked. So next was the surveillance and preparation evidence. There was quite a lot of evidence that Byron, had removed the light bulbs that went towards the basement so that the area would be completely dark for his so-called victims. Byron also set up multiple audio and video surveillance cameras around the house, inside and out. And then, like I said as well, Byron had moved his car down the street. As for the physical evidence in the autopsies, Nick had been shot 3 times, Haile 6. Both of their bodies were later found wrapped up in a tarp. This pretty much suggests staging since Byron had moved their bodies from the crime scene because they both were at the bottom of the basement stairs when they had died. Well, Haile was not. She was on top of her cousin, which is horrific. The judge instructed that the state had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Byron did not act with reasonable force, and that for first degree premeditated murder, the jury had to find that Byron had planned and intended the killing beyond him just reacting to self defense. And because in the state of Minnesota, they do not use a stand your ground statue. Instead, they have something called a reasonable person standard, which I like this, but I think there's a lot of loopholes in this too. So, with a reasonable person standard, any force in a case must be seen as reasonable under its own circumstances. But I think that can be tricky because where do you come up with the term reasonable?
Yeah, because I think it's supposed to be like, okay, a person like you,
Right.
but everyone's gonna react differently. And then
Right.
also everyone's gonna react differently than what they think they would do.
Right. You never, because we always say on this podcast, you never know truly how you're going to act unless you're in that situation. Like I can tell you all day that I'm going to fight and not flee. And then when it comes down to it, I might fucking flee.
I will be running so fast.
Yeah. So on April 29th, 2014, the jury deliberated only for 3 hours before returning with a verdict, which I think is very short. On 2 counts of first degree premeditated murder, Byron David Smith was found guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Byron walked out of the courtroom, he didn't look at a single person. In fact, it almost looked like he was just entering another room in his own home. He was emotionless, expressionless, and pretty much like he could have cared less. As for where the case stands today, Byron Smith remains in prison serving his life sentence. He has filed multiple appeals, but so far all of them have been rejected. The courts continue to state that what happened in Byron's basement that Thanksgiving Day was not an act of self defense. And legal experts in the state of Minnesota do use Byron's case as a baseline for what the difference is between defending your own home and executing intruders that no longer pose a threat. In the end, the Thanksgiving murders of 18-year-old Haile and 17-year-old Nick forced the town of Little Falls to confront an uncomfortable truth about fear, anger, and the boundaries of what self defense really is. Yes, two teenage cousins made a terrible choice on that 2012 holiday, but what waited for them in the basement was something far darker than what should have been their consequences. In the basement, there was a man consumed by paranoia, isolation, and a desire for retribution. And in that space, two young lives were violently taken, and one older man destined to spend the rest of his days behind bars, replaying the decision that he had made. And that is the story of Byron David Smith, the Little Falls, Minnesota 2012 Thanksgiving murderer.
First off, the PTSD makes a lot of sense.
I will say in this case, what he did was not reasonable by any means. Little taken back that there wasn't more mental health aspect played into it because it did talk about his background being deployed so many times, his job role in security, and that he had PTSD. But then when it came to actually like him being on trial, I don't think any, like most of that wasn't brought up. And I feel like they could have maybe done some type of plea regarding that.
Yeah, because I mean, he already has PTSD. He's paranoid on top of that because of the several break-ins. And he,
Right. Like that year, 3 to 4 break-ins. I mean, I would be armed if I was still living in that house.
yeah, and then he's just like so nonchalant about it and like
Yeah.
muttering to himself.
That gives me PTSD vibes, like mental health for sure.
Yeah, like he said he like neutralized the target.
That right there, I was like, oh, okay. So we're deployed right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not that he should have done anything that he did, but I think maybe he should be in a mental state hospital or something. Like maybe they should be looking more into his health than just sentencing him with, without parole.
Yeah. Not an excuse, but a
Not an
factor.
excuse. Yeah. So, well, he's obviously he's going to die in prison. I mean, he's probably 80 now, I think, right? Yeah, something like that. Okay, you want to jump into overtime?
Let's do it.
Speaking of Thanksgiving, what are you up to? What are you doing this Thanksgiving? Do you guys celebrate it every year? Like that's a staple?
Yeah, so we do it on Friday
Why?
because there's, family of divorces. There's multiple factions.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the family goes somewhere for on Thursday and then they come back and then we all do it again together on Friday.
That's like too much.
It's a lot of food. When I was a kid, we'd go up to West Virginia. We'd go to like four houses in a day.
No,
We'd have like Thanksgiving breakfast,
no.
lunch, brunch, dinner, snack, and it's all the same food at every house.
Kylie, okay, you obviously were there around me pre-kid.
Mhm.
So you can tell if there's a difference or not. Would I have done that pre-child anyways?
No.
And now that I have a kid and I'm heavily pregnant, people are like, "Oh, aren't you excited for Thanksgiving? You're pregnant." And I'm like, "No, no, because I have no social stamina. I don't know, even if I was younger, like in college, I think I still wouldn't do 4 houses a day. I think two is too many.
See, my mom was doing it with six young children somehow.
Can't imagine. She honestly, what she was doing was wearing you guys out.
And we were stuffed. We slept good on Thursday night.
Mm-hmm.
And then she would wake up at like 3, 4 a.m. to go Black Friday shopping because that's, you had to do that back then.
Oh, you are a part of the Black Friday people.
I've never been actually.
Really?
The kids were not allowed.
I could see your mom doing it though.
Oh,
Oh, I would never take my kids Black Friday shopping.
oh no, her grandma, aunts, cousins,
Yeah.
like matching t-shirts
Oh my God.
themed every year. They would cross state lines. Yeah.
They went hard.
Yeah,
It
I
was it
think,
was a holiday for them.
oh, it's a girls' trip.
I did Black Friday once in my life. I just remember thinking like this is not worth losing my sleep.
There's nothing I need more than sleep.
Thank God for Amazon.
Even though I've never done the Black Friday thing, I do enjoy watching the shenanigans.
That was the best part.
The internet shopping and it's what is it, Cyber Monday, all that stuff.
Yeah,
No one does the 3 a.m. Black Friday anymore, and it kind of makes me sad.
I know. I will say, can you imagine? Honestly, Kylie, one day we should post up like at a Walmart and
And just
watch a
watch.
Black Friday. Yeah, grab our cocktails, post up in the lawn seats inside the store somewhere. But here's the
Okay.
thing is as the years have gone by, because we live in a wonderful country and stuff, the violence on Black Friday and any other day of the year has significantly gotten worse. I remember like after high school, it was like people started getting trampled to death on Black Friday. They're getting shot over who gets the last TV and stuff like this. I don't want a part of that. I don't want a part of that. I would love to watch it.
Oh, I remember watching the TV when the Wii came out in the at Best Buy.
Yeah. Oh, Best Buy is crazy, I bet.
Maybe we should do Best Buy.
Best Buy would be a good one. Do you watch the Thanksgiving parade?
We do, and I mean, I hate every second of it, and it's very cringy, but I love to watch it.
But don't you have to watch? That's my thing is I always forget. So the way that I grew up with my both my parents were in the flight industry growing up, still are. My mom was a teacher at the time, but my dad was a flight attendant. And so we took Thanksgiving and would go travel. That was like our one big trip a year kind of thing. So
Nice.
I did grow up with Thanksgiving, but it wasn't any importance to me. And that's kind of instilled in my head still is like, I might, this might be controversial, but like I could give a rat's butt about Thanksgiving. Like the food isn't my cup of food. I don't like social interaction to that extent where you can't leave a place. You have to wait for other people to leave. It's just not my favorite thing. Now, getting older, I understand. I'm cooking more. I'm doing baking. Like I'm doing fun stuff this year. Millie will be able to experience it. Sure. Christmas is more of my like cup of tea for sure. But
Mm.
Thanksgiving, I grew up traveling mostly. So more okay with that than going to four houses a day.
You know what we religiously watch and like avidly watch is the Westminster Dog Show.
That's okay. That's the point I was getting to. What I was trying to say after I said all of that is I do remember every day on Thanksgiving waking up and just remembering the day of that there's a Thanksgiving parade. Because I always forget about it until it's on the TV. And it's not a good, it's not great. It's not great, but you have to watch it. It's like you're mesmerized by it pretty much. But my favorite part is the part that followed.
Oh, we will sit there and watch it and we judge the dogs like we have a clue about how to judge dogs.
Well, and it always, and still to this day, pisses me off that the same breeds win. And it's always the fluffy dogs or the long haired coat dogs or the small little dogs. And then you see the group of like the hunting dogs. And I'm like, yes, these are my people. And it's like the most beautiful hound or pit bull you've ever seen in your life. We, honestly, we need to make like the judging cards where it's like 10 points, 8 points, something, and just
Oh,
record our visual reactions to the dog.
okay, we have to do Thanksgiving together next year, I guess. Okay, we could do our own Thanksgiving. We can have completely different food.
Yeah. And honestly, we could go somewhere, rent an Airbnb. There goes your vacation right there. Do a
Mhm.
Thanksgiving and just make it our own tradition. That's my thing is I think growing up, especially because I don't live near my family, I think with Millie and Andy, once she comes, Thanksgiving, I kind of want to like do our own traditions.
That would be fun.
Yeah, like go somewhere for Thanksgiving, but still do like the whole aspect of a big meal, make the dog show the biggest point of Thanksgiving.
And then when they get to like the final round, like they have, the best dog of like each breed,
Yeah.
everyone has to pick a dog.
Yeah.
And if their dog wins, I don't know, some big prize.
A prize of some sort.
Yes.
Yes. For the children, $100 bill. For the adults, vodka. So now I'm hungry.
All right, Kate's got to get to baking.
Yes, I need to go eat. So we will finish there. So with that, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. For more information about our case, you can check us out on our website at overmydeadpod.com. Social medias, you get the whole concept. Follow, like, subscribe. Hope you guys all had a wonderful Thanksgiving to those that celebrate, to those that don't. Cool. Just another week. Love you all. Bye, podheads. Bye.
Bye.